A path built on lies will always lead to ruin. True justice is not found in the fury of revenge, but in the courage to face a painful truth. The last thing Cordelia saw was the cold indifference in her husband's face as he lowered the smoking revolver. The world had tilted on its axis just moments before, the carriage halting on the open prairie with the tired excuse of a broken wheel. Now, the air was thick, with the scent of gunpowder and betrayal. His words, a venomous lie about an attack by natives, still echoed in the oppressive heat. He had spoken them with such practiced ease, the same ease with which he had sold false dreams to hopeful settlers and broken promises to the Lakota people. The vast, empty landscape began to blur at the edges, the sun a blinding white eye in a sky that offered no comfort, no witnesses to the crime. Darkness lapped at the edges of her vision. She felt the rough blades of prairie grass against her cheek, the sticky warmth spreading across the bodice of her dress. Leland had not even granted her a final glance. He was already moving, his silhouette shrinking against the horizon, a man walking away from a life he had just discarded like a spent cartridge. She was a loose end, a complication in his grand deception, and he had dealt with her with brutal efficiency. The pain was a distant fire, less sharp than the chilling realization that the love she thought she had was a carefully constructed cage, and its door had just been slammed shut with a bullet. Her world was reduced to dust and a fading sky. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the buzz of insects and the sigh of the wind through the plains. The two men Leland had hired, the driver and a guard, lay still near the carriage, their parts in the tragic play concluded. They were props in his story, meant to add authenticity to his tale of a savage ambush. Cordelia tried to call out, but only a faint whisper escaped her lips, a sound swallowed by the immense emptiness. She had known Leland was ambitious, that he possessed a ruthlessness that sometimes frightened her in the quiet hours of the night. But she had never imagined its depths, never believed it could be turned on her with such finality. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the encroaching shadows. Was this to be her end? To perish alone in the dirt, a forgotten victim of one man's greed? Her life in the East, with its structured society and gentle manners, seemed like a dream from another lifetime. Out here, the rules were different. They were harsher, written in dust and blood. Leland understood this land far better than she did. He knew how to twist its inherent dangers to his advantage, how to use prejudice as a weapon and fear as a shield. As consciousness fled, her last coherent thought was of his face, not filled with rage or passion, but with a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The thunder of hooves broke the stillness, but it was not the sound of cavalry riding to the rescue. A party of Lakota hunters on lean, muscular ponies crested the nearby rise, their forms stark against the blue canvas of the sky. They moved with a fluid grace, their eyes scanning the landscape, missing nothing. At their head rode Kahi, a warrior whose quiet intensity set him apart. His gaze fell upon the scene below, the abandoned carriage, the still figures of the two men, and the splash of color that was Cordelia's dress against the brown earth. He raised a hand, and his warriors halted, their horses stamping impatiently as they took in the signs of violence. They approached with caution, circling the carriage like wolves assessing a kill. Their eyes were sharp, discerning. "The work of a rifle, not an arrow," one warrior muttered, gesturing to the fallen guard. They recognized the carriage as belonging to the land surveyor, the man who had spoken with a forked tongue and whose maps were woven with lies. When they saw Cordelia, a flicker of recognition, then suspicion, passed through them. This was the surveyor's wife. A heated, low discussion began. "She is one of them. Leave her. It is justice," one of the younger warriors urged, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His sentiment was shared by others. Kahi dismounted and walked toward Cordelia. His name meant to soar, and he often saw things from a higher perspective than his peers. He looked past the fine fabric of her dress, past her association with a man they despised. He looked into her face, pale and stained with dirt, and saw not the cunning of her husband, but the raw, desperate agony of betrayal. He had seen that look before in the eyes of a trapped animal. This was not the work of his people, nor was it the work of a simple bandit. It was something more personal, more sinister. His instincts, honed by years of survival on the plains, told him the obvious story was a lie. "We will take her," Kahi announced, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that silenced all argument. The others looked at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and reluctance, but they did not challenge his decision. To interfere with a man's treachery was one thing, but to leave a wounded woman to the vultures was another. It was not their way. Two warriors carefully lifted Cordelia, her body limp in their arms. Kahi watched, his expression unreadable. He had invited a great unknown into their lives, a woman who was the wife of their enemy. He did not know if this act of mercy would be a grave mistake or the beginning of a different path. Meanwhile, Leland stormed into the nearest army fort, a convincing portrait of a man undone by tragedy. He had torn his coat, smeared dirt on his face, and even scratched his own arm to simulate a struggle. "They came out of nowhere," he cried, stumbling toward the commander's office. "A war party, savages. They killed my men, took everything." His voice was a masterful symphony of grief and terror, each note played to perfection for his audience of soldiers and frightened civilians who had gathered at the commotion. He leaned heavily on a post, breathing in ragged gasps, a broken man seeking justice in a land of heathens. It was a magnificent performance. Captain Morrison, the fort's commander, was a man who preferred order to nuance. He saw a distraught citizen, a tale of a brutal attack, and a clear enemy. "Calm yourself, man," he said, though his own face was hardening with resolve. "Tell me everything. Where did this happen?" Leland, with tears welling in his eyes, described the fictional ambush with vivid detail, placing the attack deep within territory claimed by Kahi's band of Lakota. He knew the captain's prejudices and played them like a fiddle. "They took my wife," Leland choked out, the lie catching in his throat just enough to sound genuine. "My Cordelia. They dragged her away." His story spread through the fort and the adjacent settlement like a prairie fire. It reached the very settlers he had swindled, men and women who had poured their life savings into plots of land that existed only on his forged maps. Their simmering frustration now had a target. Their fear of the unknown, their resentment of the native tribes, and their anger at being cheated all coalesced into a single burning point of hatred. Leland addressed them directly, his voice ringing with false sorrow. "These heathens have not only stolen my beloved wife, they stand in the way of your future, of the civilization we are trying to build." The crowd roared in agreement. The call for retribution was immediate and unanimous. Men grabbed their rifles, their faces grim. Captain Morrison, seeing the explosive mood of the settlers and believing Leland's story completely, promised swift action. A punitive expedition would be formed at dawn. They would ride to the Lakota camp, demand the return of the woman, and deliver a firm lesson to those who dared attack honest folk. Leland watched the maelstrom he had unleashed, a faint, triumphant smile touching his lips before he concealed it with a mask of sorrow. His plan was working perfectly. The conflict would cover all his tracks. Cordelia drifted in a confusing fog of pain and feverish dreams. She was vaguely aware of being in a teepee, the scent of wood smoke and strange herbs filling her senses. Light filtered through the stretched buffalo hide, casting a warm, gentle glow on the unfamiliar world around her. At times, a face would swim into view above her, the wrinkled, compassionate face of an old woman who hummed a low, rhythmic chant as she worked. This was Zinkala, the tribe's healer. She moved with an economy of motion. Her hands, though old, were steady and sure as she tended to the wound in Cordelia's shoulder, applying a strange, dark poultice that cooled the fire. Life in the camp went on around her, but she felt like a ghost observing a world to which she did not belong. The guttural sounds of the Lakota language were a constant, flowing river of noise she could not comprehend. When she was strong enough to sit up, she saw the suspicion in the eyes of those who passed her teepee. Children would stop their games and fall silent, staring at her with wide, curious eyes before being shooed away by their mothers. The warriors, friends of the man named Kahi, would nod stiffly, but their faces were hard, their distrust a palpable wall between them. She was a symbol of the world that brought them only broken treaties and sorrow. She was their enemy's wife, a liability they had been burdened with. Why did they not just leave her on the prairie? The question haunted her waking hours. The only comfort she found was in the quiet visits from Kahi. He would appear at the entrance of her teepee once a day, usually as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp. He never stayed long and rarely spoke. He would simply bring her a bowl of water, or a thin, savory broth. He would watch her for a moment, his dark eyes holding not the hatred she saw in others but a deep, searching curiosity, a silent question she felt she had to answer. One evening, as he handed her a wooden bowl, their fingers brushed. The fleeting contact sent a strange jolt through her, a spark of warmth in the cold sea of her isolation. He met her gaze, and for an instant the wall between them seemed to vanish. She saw not a savage warrior, as Leland would have described him, but a man of profound stillness and strength. In his eyes she saw a flicker of empathy, a shared humanity that transcended the boundaries of their two hostile worlds. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and was gone, leaving Cordelia with the strange and unsettling feeling that this silent man understood her better than her own husband ever had. With each passing day, as the fever subsided and the pain in her shoulder dulled to a persistent ache, Cordelia's mind grew clearer. The fragmented memories of the attack coalesced into a sharp, horrifying picture. The clarity brought with it a suffocating wave of shame. Shame for her own blindness, for the willing ignorance she had maintained throughout her marriage to Leland. She had seen the signs of his deceit, the late-night meetings, the carefully hidden ledgers, but had chosen to believe his easy explanations. Now the full weight of his crimes crashed down upon her, and she realized his betrayal was not just against her, but against everyone. She knew what he was doing. His fabricated story of her abduction was not just a cover for his attempt on her life, it was a spark intended to set the entire prairie ablaze. He was using her as a pawn to incite a war, a conflict that would erase his trail of fraud in a wave of blood and chaos. The lives of the settlers he had cheated, the lives of the Lakota people who had shown her mercy, they were all meaningless to him. The thought that her silence would make her an accomplice to his monstrous plan was unbearable. She had to speak. She had to stop him, whatever the cost to herself. She asked Zenkala to bring Kahi to her. When he entered the teepee, his presence seeming to fill the small space, she struggled to sit upright, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I must speak with you," she said, her voice raspy but firm. He listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask, as the whole sordid story poured out of her. She told him of Leland's scheme, selling the same parcels of land over and over, of his plan to blame the Lakota for his crimes, and of the final, cold-blooded betrayal on the prairie. Every word was an act of cutting herself off from her old life. "He is a liar," she concluded, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "He means to start a war to hide his guilt." Then she remembered the one piece of tangible proof she had. "My satchel. The leather bag that was with me. He kept duplicate deeds in it, a second set of records. He was always so arrogant, he never thought anyone would find them." Kahi's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes sharpened with a new intensity. He remembered his warriors finding the bag near the carriage. He gave a single, decisive nod. The woman's story, which had seemed so unlikely, now had the hard ring of truth. Kahi immediately called a council of the elders and the leading warriors. They gathered in the large, central teepee as the sun set, the fire in the middle casting flickering shadows on their grim faces. He stood before them and recounted Cordelia's story, his voice low and even, omitting no detail of Leland's treachery or his plan to incite war. He then produced the leather satchel and opened it, revealing the neatly bundled land deeds. A murmur of anger rippled through the teepee. The proof of the white man's deceit was undeniable, a physical manifestation of the lies they had been living with for months. A young, fiery warrior named Mato stood up, his face a mask of rage. "This man has spit on our hospitality and threatened our families. His wife tells us that soldiers and settlers are gathering to attack us. We should not wait for them. We should ride out now and meet them with our own fire. We will show them the strength of the Lakota." A chorus of assent rose from the younger warriors. They were tired of broken treaties, tired of being pushed from their lands. The desire for a fight, for a chance to reclaim their honor through battle, was a potent force in the teepee. The elders listened patiently, their weathered faces showing the gravity of the moment. Then Kahi spoke again, his voice cutting through the heated atmosphere. "To attack them is to do exactly what the surveyor wants," he said calmly. "We would be proving his lie for him. We would become the savages of his story. The soldiers would see our attack as justification, and they would bring their full force against us. We would not be fighting just the settlers, but the entire United States Army. It is a war we cannot win with arrows and rifles." He let his words sink into the heavy silence. "Our strength is not in our weapons right now," Kahi continued, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the firelight. "Our strength is in the truth. This woman, the wife of our enemy, has given us a different kind of weapon." He held up one of the forged deeds. "This is what will defeat Leland, not a charge across the plains. We must use his own deceit against him. We must show the settlers who their true enemy is. It is a path of great risk, but it is the only path that leads to peace for our people. Fighting will only lead to graves." The council fell silent, weighing the path of the warrior against the path of wisdom. The debate in the council teepee raged for hours, but Kahi's logic was undeniable. The elders, led by a wise old chief named Chaitan, finally agreed that a direct confrontation would be disastrous. They would place their trust in Kahi's plan, a gamble that rested entirely on the word of an outsider and the hope that truth could quell a mob hungry for blood. The decision was made. Kahi would ride to the settlers' camp, not as a warrior seeking battle, but as a messenger bearing an inconvenient truth. He would take the evidence of Leland's fraud and confront them directly. It was a mission from which he might not return. As Kahi prepared his horse, selecting his fastest and most reliable mount, Cordelia emerged from her tipi. She had heard the outcome of the council. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with a fierce determination. "I am going with you," she stated, not as a request, but as a fact. Kahi turned to her, his brow furrowed. "It is too dangerous. They believe you are a captive. When they see you with me, they will likely start shooting before we can speak." He argued against it, pointing out the risks, the sheer foolishness of her walking into a camp of angry men who believed she was a victim. "They will not believe you without me," Cordelia insisted, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "They will see you as a trickster, another lying native. They need to hear the truth from my lips. They need to see me, standing there by choice. It is the only way." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Leland is my husband. This is my shame, my responsibility. I will not hide here while you risk your life to clean up the mess he made." Kahi looked at her for a long moment, seeing the iron resolve beneath her fragile appearance. He saw a courage that matched any of his warriors. He finally gave a slow nod of acceptance. They rode out as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky. The journey was tense and mostly silent. The only sounds, the rhythmic drumming of their horses, hooves, and the whisper of the wind. They were two people from different worlds, united by a desperate cause. Cordelia, in a simple borrowed deerskin dress, felt more at home than she ever had in her fine silks. Beside her, Kahi rode with an alert stillness, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. A silent understanding grew between them, with every mile they covered, a bond forged in shared risk and a mutual respect that was beginning to feel like something more. They saw the campfires of the settlers long before they saw the camp itself, a smudge of smoke against the vast open sky. As they drew closer, the chaotic collection of wagons and tents took shape, buzzing with angry energy. A sentry spotted them, and his shouted alarm cut through the morning air. Instantly, the camp erupted. Men poured out of their tents, grabbing rifles and taking cover behind wagons. Within seconds, dozens of gun barrels were aimed at the two riders who had paused on a small ridge overlooking the camp. The air crackled with hostility, a powder keg waiting for a spark. "That is him! That is one of the heathens!" a man shouted, his voice dripping with venom. "And he has the woman!" Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Kahi was right. Their appearance together was seen as a confirmation of Leland's story. She could feel the waves of hatred rolling off the crowd below. Kahi remained perfectly still in his saddle, his face impassive, showing no fear. He held one hand up, palm open, in the universal sign of peace, though it seemed to have little effect on the enraged mob. His calm was a small island in a sea of fury, and it gave Cordelia a sliver of courage. A path cleared in the crowd, and Leland strode forward, Captain Morrison at his side. Leland's face was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock at seeing Cordelia alive, fury that his plan had gone so wrong, and a desperate, calculating fear. "See," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger. "The savage parades his captive. Shoot him! Shoot him down and save my wife!" Several men tightened their grip on their triggers, their knuckles white. The moment hung on a razor's edge. A single, nervous finger could unleash a volley of shots and end their mission, end their lives, right there. In that critical instant, before the captain could give an order or a settler could lose his nerve, Cordelia acted. She urged her horse forward a few steps, moving slightly in front of Kahi. With a trembling hand, she reached into her satchel and pulled out the bundle of duplicate land deeds, holding them high for all to see. "This is not a rescue!" she cried out, her voice higher than usual but carrying with surprising strength across the tense silence. "And I am not a captive!" Kahi remained behind her, a silent, watchful guardian, his presence a testament to the truth she was about to speak. A confused murmur went through the crowd. The scene before them did not make sense. The woman was supposed to be a terrified victim, yet she spoke with strength. The native was supposed to be a vicious captor, yet he sat his horse with quiet dignity. "My husband Leland is a liar and a thief." Cordelia's voice grew stronger with every word, fueled by righteous anger. "He shot me and left me to die on the prairie. He did it to cover his crimes, the same crimes he committed against all of you." She spurred her horse down the ridge and into the camp, Kahi following close behind her. She did not stop until she was in the center of the stunned crowd. She dismounted and began to walk from man to man, thrusting the fraudulent deeds into their hands. "Look at these. Your names, your plots of land. Now look at this one." She would show them another deed for the same plot with a different name. "He sold you all the same empty dream. He sold you land that was never his to sell, land that belongs to the Lakota, and land that he sold to your neighbors." The evidence was irrefutable, passed from hand to hand, the truth spreading like a contagion through the angry settlers. The crowd's anger, once a focused beam of hatred aimed at Kahi, began to diffuse and turn, slowly but surely, toward the true architect of their misery. Leland's face had gone ashen. His confident bluster evaporated, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered rat. "She is delirious. The savages have twisted her mind," he sputtered, but his words lacked conviction. No one was listening to him anymore. They were looking at the papers in their hands, at their own signatures on worthless documents, and their eyes were filled with a new, cold fury. They saw who their real enemy was. Realizing his game was over, Leland made a desperate move. He bolted, shoving men aside as he sprinted toward his horse, where saddlebags filled with the settlers' money were waiting. His attempt to flee was an admission of guilt that ignited the crowd's rage. They surged forward, but Captain Morrison's voice boomed like a cannon. "Hold! This man will face proper justice." His soldiers moved swiftly, forming a line between the settlers and their target. As Leland reached his horse, two soldiers intercepted him, wrestling him to the ground. They hauled the struggling, cursing man to his feet. Morrison looked at Leland with contempt. "A lifetime of labor building the railroad awaits you. A slower end, but one you have earned." Cordelia turned away, her heart aching for the utter ruin his greed had wrought. With Leland bound and under guard, a heavy, exhausted silence fell over the camp. The settlers' fiery rage had cooled into the cold ashes of betrayal and shame. They looked at Cordelia and Kahi with weary respect. Captain Morrison, his face grim, approached them. "It seems we owe you an apology," he said to Kahi, "and you, ma'am, a debt of gratitude for preventing a disaster." There were no more threats, no more talk of war. Justice, though it would be delivered by the law, felt certain. One by one, the settlers began to pack their wagons, their dreams of a new life shattered, their anger replaced by the bitter task of starting over. As the camp slowly emptied and the wagons trundled away, Cordelia felt a profound sense of dislocation. The world she had known was gone forever. She was the widow of a despised traitor. There was no place for her in the town, no future for her in the society she had left behind. Her name was now a mark of shame. She stood alone in the quiet prairie, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face, a solitary figure adrift between two worlds, belonging to neither. The brief alliance with the settlers was over, and she was left with nothing but the empty space where her life used to be. Kahi watched her, his expression gentle. He had seen the lost look in her eyes. He understood that in saving his people she had condemned herself to exile. He guided his horse to her side, the animal's soft nicker breaking the silence. He did not speak for a long moment, simply sitting there, his presence a quiet comfort in the vast emptiness. He had come to admire this woman, her resilience, her fierce commitment to justice. He saw a spirit as strong and untamed as the land itself. He knew his next words would change both of their lives forever. He finally leaned down and extended his hand to her. "You have no home to return to," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Your path is now your own to choose, but you do not have to walk it alone. There is a place for you among my people, a place of honor." It was not a gesture of pity, but an offer of belonging, of respect, of a new beginning. Cordelia looked up at his outstretched hand, then into his dark, steady eyes. In them, she saw not just a safe harbor, but the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. She placed her hand in his, and he gently pulled her up onto the horse behind him. The warmth of his back was a solid, comforting presence. He turned the horse without a word, and together they began the slow journey away from the wreckage of her former life, riding toward a horizon painted in the fiery colors of sunset, toward a new home.